Okay, this is an explainer video for the decision machine that I built for all of the webinars that we have for our core product. So I'm going to dive in and try to explain as much of this as I can. This will probably be a fairly long video. When I put this on YouTube, it will actually have mile markers or markers in it that you can click through and kind of see where the parts of this. I'm shooting this video twofold. Number one, for me and my team, so when I forget how this works, I can come back and reference it. The other thing is to be able to share it with people, because this thing is way too massive to try to explain in an email or a conversation. So I just wanted to kind of run it down. So I started with the basic premise of wanting people to be able to get invitations to an email once or to a webinar once a month. We've got 14 webinars that are up and running. I took our top 6 and I've built them out here. I'll probably put a couple of more in here at some point. But for now, this is our top 6 webinars, and then below here is kind of what I'm calling part 2, which is a 4-day cash machine that people that register for one of those webinars, they will get a 4-day cash machine offer for our core product the Monday after that they view a webinar, or a week after they view a webinar. The whole intent being, if they don't buy from the webinar, that we do something to follow up with them about a week or a week and a half after that. They'll only get the 4-day cash machine once every 3 months, and there's 2 different variants of that. So they would only see that 4-day cash machine email once per year, which I feel like in the beginning that's sufficient. So this is what the results of the reporting look like for this cash machine inside of Infusionsoft. And if I zoom out just to show you a little bit of the magnitude, this will make more sense when we get deeper into this. But this right here, this section right here is the first webinar, and then you'll see if I scroll over to the right, or you'll see that we've got 6 webinars in there. Okay, and that's even the webinar that we're running ads to right now is getting some action in here. So that'll make more sense as we dive in. So let's go ahead and click edit, and then get back to the webinar. So I'm going to walk step by step through the phases of this and try to give as much detail as I can about how I did this, so that if you're trying to build this, you can make sense of it. For my team, hopefully this will be something we can reference. Now, before I started anything, what I do is I start a Trello board. You can do this with any mind mapping or to-do list type software. Let me scroll up a little bit. And what I do is I jump in here and I start putting in scenarios. You'll see, and then I hide them when I'm done. But just to show you all the scenarios, I start writing in here what I want to happen. And then I put what ifs in there the whole time that I'm building a campaign like this, which this is the biggest one I've ever built. I'm saying, well, what if this happens? Well, what if somebody buys and then they cancel? And then I put that scenario in there so that I can come back and build a solution for it down the road. So let me show you how this works. This part over here on the left, I'm going to make these as big as possible so that you can see them. These represent the 6 webinars that we have. And so what happens right now is we run Facebook ads to a webinar to generate leads and sales. So we're sending cold traffic to a webinar opt-in page. When they opt in, the next day, most of the time, people are able to see that webinar. We're selling about 5% of those people. This campaign is built to serve these other webinars on an automatic basis. And so right now I'm thinking that's every 30 days. So these tags kind of kickstart things. So when they sign up for a webinar from a Facebook ad, it'll automatically kick them into this system. Now I had to create another process to be able to put our email address list that we already have, which is about 35,000 people, into this sequence. So the way I did that is just loading them into an existing campaign, because those campaigns for these 6 webinars, they kickstart this decision machine. And I'll show you that in a minute. But as soon as they go through one of those webinars, or actually let me slow down and do that now. Let me jump over. Here's an invitation sequence that I have for this webinar called 6 Things Pastors Do to Kill Generosity, because we sell to pastors. So we drop them in. It says add contacts here. I put that in there so I can find them when I'm running a report. And you'll see I actually just dropped people in this morning, a test list. These are 9,500 people right here that are unengaged marketable. That means they haven't opened an email from us in 6 months, but that we can still market to them. And I drop them in, and the reason I'm doing that is because I want to make sure that there's no holes in this thing before I drop my entire list in here. And inside of this sequence here, you'll see here's my emails. So there's a couple of critical things in here. This webinar in process tag is one of the tags that we're using all the way through the decision machine to make sure that we're not sending emails out to people that are in process. Now, we're using the webinar and process tags not just for invitations and webinars, but also for the 4-day cash machine that we send, as well as we'll be using it in part 3 to be able to send one-off emails to our list with new things that come up. Okay, so then here's my timer that says the first email is going to go on any Thursday at 7 p.m. Now, I had these invitation sequences built before. We build our invitations so that we can put people through them multiple times, which is really important. I'll show you something about that before I get out of this. But as soon as that timer goes and it's time to send this email, we're going to apply a tag. Now, this tag right here, this 6T Generosity Invitation Sequence tag, that is the tag that kickstarts the decision process over here. You'll see it's right here. Yeah, this tag right here, the second one. So it's going to start the decision machine over here as soon as the invitations begin to go. Now, you're going to want to think through how you do that if you're going to do it a different way, but I wanted to be able to control everything from a single point in time. And in that single point in time, it's the invitation sequence here. Okay, so that tag's applied there, and then the very next day, I'm going to remove that tag. Okay, I remove it here. I also remove it over here inside of the decision machine. The reason I'm so particular about removing tags is because if you don't have ways to remove the tags, what happens is the next time they come through, if they get that invitation sequence again and that they already have that tag, then applying that tag does not start this process again. Okay, that's super important that you understand that removing the tags is critical. You've got to go back through everything and make sure that your tags are being removed. Okay, so let me, that's all I have to do inside of my invitation sequence there. Let me show you one other thing before we get out of this, just as a case in point. If you're going to reuse webinars over time with the contacts, you've got to have a way to remove all these tags. And so we do that right off the bat. So as soon as somebody comes into one of our webinars, if we add them to a invitation campaign, we're going to remove all these tags first before we put them through, because we don't know who's been through and who hasn't. Same thing is true with the post-registration part of a webinar. Now, if you're not familiar with Infusionsoft or are new to Infusionsoft, this is going to be seeing these campaigns is going to be confusing. I get that. So don't let it overwhelm you. Just understand that these were things that we built out over a long period of time, and now we're trying to string them together. But inside of this campaign, anytime somebody registers for one of these webinars from a Facebook ad, one of the first things we're going to do is remove all of the tags from that person. And that's so that other stuff can trigger. There's trigger points in all of these campaigns, like this one right here that gets applied from Stealth Seminar. This tag gets applied from Stealth Seminar's API that says, okay, these people's time for the webinar has come. It applies this tag, and then we can say, did they attend the webinar? Were they already members, or did they no-show? And we can do follow-up based on that. The other thing we're doing was removing our reminder tags for the webinar. I noticed several months ago that we've got webinars that we've run multiple times, and the show-up rates were getting really low. And then I realized it's because our sequences here did not connect to this tag, which means when the goal went off here, because this wasn't connected, the people just stayed in this reminder, which is not a big deal if they're only going through once. But if you're going to put them back through, what happens is when that tag gets applied, they can't go into this sequence because they're already in there, even if they're queued. Huge point to remember as you're building out something this complex. You're always looking for the sticking points. If you've got sequences like this and they don't have a goal after them, chances are that's where your sticking point is going to be. Okay, so I think that covers that off from that standpoint. Okay, so now that we've run the invitation, the first invitation is gone. It triggers over here. You'll notice that we remove, we add a couple of tags and then we remove some. So we're adding this 30-day webinar invitation timer. So this is the timer, the tag that's going to trigger waiting 30 days before we send them any other invitation to a webinar. And then we're going to give them a 6-month timer for this particular webinar, because after the 30 days, we're going to put them all the way through this decision process. We need to know which webinars we've already served them in the last 6 months. Now, after I got started in this, I realized that the timer for a particular webinar may not always be 6 months. Sometimes it may be 12 months when we get 12 webinars in here. So I just stuck with the nomenclature of 6-month timer instead of trying to change it, because eventually what we'll do is we'll go back and change the timers on those so that, this webinar we may wait I think right now we're waiting 7 months, but down the road it may be 12 months, but the tag will remain the same, and we'll use that same tag terminology all the way through. And then we're going to remove a tag, which is the invitation sequence tag. That's the tag that we removed both in the invitation sequence over here, and we're removing it here. And again, we're doing that to make sure that these tags all get removed. Now, when you're removing tags, when you're thinking through that, you've got to think when they're a critical tag that's going to stop or eliminate a process, you really do have to think through, okay, if they get this tag, where does it get removed? And is there a goal set between the application and removal of that tag? Let's say that if the tag got applied and the person became a customer, do we have a place where that tag gets removed in case they cancel, but they want to sign up for a webinar later on? There's just a ton of things to think through, and that's why you've got to create all of your scenarios over here inside of something like Trello to be able to keep up with that and then kind of check those off the list. The next stop in the process is this: remove the start machine tags. The start decision machine tag was, when I started building this, it was originally designed to start the whole process, and then I realized I actually need to be able to start these from the campaign process. But the value in this is we restart this campaign over and over again every time somebody goes through an invitation sequence, which pushes them back out to here, and that'll make more sense soon. But as soon as I apply that tag, it satisfies that goal, hits this sequence here, and then I want to remove it as soon as possible. I don't want to think through how I'm going to remove this down the road. This tag will literally be applied and then immediately removed. Okay, I hope you get that. And then we're going to apply another tag here, which is the decision machine permanent tag. I'm not sure how useful that tag is going to be long term. What I do know for right now is that I needed it to be able to separate people that are currently in the machine versus people that we're trying to add in this initial stage of the process. Okay, and then this timer right here is for 3 minutes only, and it's basically to give the system time to apply the 6-month tag and also the tag for the 30-day timer. So those tags that we talked about in the last step, I want to make sure that we've got time to add those because a couple of things are going to happen shortly after this campaign or this sequence. Okay, now let's talk about current members, this section here. One thing to note too, as we're looking at this, anytime I put a decision node in, I usually try to do a pass through before and after so that I can reuse. Now, I didn't do it right here, but you'll notice throughout this, I've got a lot of extra sequences in here, and I put those in so they're just really easy to copy out. I can copy this entire section out right here. I could, if I needed to copy the members part of it, I could copy it into another segment. I could do the same thing here with this next node that we're going to deal with the 30-day timer in. So that's something important to know as we move through this. So this decision node here just does nothing other than just make sure that anybody that's already signed up for our core product doesn't go through this sequence, because all of the webinars that we're putting together here are for the one core product that we have. We're going to deal with how we offer our other products later in the process. That'll actually be in part 3. We're dealing with part 1 and part 2 of the decision machine here. Just know this: if somebody comes into one of our webinars and watches one of our existing webinars and they're already a member, they have that tag, they're going to end up in this sequence here. This is one of the few sequences inside of the decision machine that you'll notice doesn't have a goal on the back side of it, because if they come in and they have this tag, they won't go into the sequence, but they'll stay stuck right here basically in this line. The big thing is they won't go through our process. Okay, so this is where it gets a little bit more complex, so I want to make sure I slow down a little bit here and talk you through what I did. Okay, so we've got 3 different sequences, 3 different paths that people can take when they get to the 30-day timer. For most people, they're going to come in through a webinar. So we're going to run a Facebook ad to a webinar. When they register for that webinar, let's say it's a generosity webinar, they're going to get our they're actually going to get our 6-month timer tag, and they're going to get our 30-day timer tag. They're going to get it right here. Okay, and I know that some of this is a review, but it's so important because this is where it'll get convoluted. So here's my 30-day timer tag that we're going to be dealing with in this section, and then they get my 6-month tag for that particular webinar. Okay, once they have that tag, keep in mind they're going to move through here. If they're not members, they're going to get to this decision node. They've already got the tag that's going to drive them into the 30-day timer right here. Let me show you what the timer looks like. It's basically this: we're going to apply a note, and then we're going to give them tags all the way through here in 5-day increments. this tag right here is 7670 currently in 30-day timer dash restart it. Okay, so what happens when they come through the first time, they get this tag. And let me explain this one first. They get that tag. Then if they sign up for another webinar from a Facebook ad or from an old email, they'll pass through this again. So they'll come through another one of these webinar sequences and they'll pass through here again. And when they get to this decision, instead of going here, they'll go up into this top spot here that has that tag. Okay, let me show you the logic just so we can make sure that we're on the same page. If I jump down in the decision node here, okay, you'll see these tags. So, and I apologize too, I added the top sequence in this segment, I added it last. So that's the reason I went in and put top, bottom, and middle in here. So this is actually the top sequence, and it basically says if they contain this tag, then I want them to go through this process. Okay, this middle one says it must contain the 30-day timer tag, so they go into the 30-day timer, and it doesn't contain this tag that we're talking about right now, the restart it tag. Okay, and then this last one is it doesn't contain either of these tags, in which case we push them on through the process. The reason I did that is because in this top tag, all we're doing here is applying the note and saying they tried to do it again. We removed this tag, the restart it tag, and then we apply this start decision machine tag again. So if they come through, if somebody comes through this process the second time, when they come through, if they're already in the 30-day timer, it pushes them up here. Okay, so that's the second time. If they try to register for it again through another webinar, the process will start all over, and their 30-day timer will start all over too. Because when we apply the tag at the top here, this start decision machine timer tag I mentioned earlier, it gets satisfied. Remember, we applied it right here. So when we apply that, it satisfies this goal right here. And that goal is also this goal. So it's going to satisfy this goal, remove some tags, and then start the process over again, in which case most of the time they're going to end up here in this 30-day timer. So the 30-day timer will just keep starting over as they re-register for events. That's something you've got to think through as you're building logic like this, like what happens not just the first time they come through, but what happens when they come through again, and thinking of all the scenarios that are in play that your contacts could participate in. And when you have a small list, it's not that big a deal. But when you've got 35,000 people that you're continuing to market with, not only with your email, but also with Facebook ads, and I'm in a fairly small market, then the chances are you are going to have people that are signing up for more than one thing at the time. Now, you'll notice also here, if they purchase our core product at any given time, it stops the 30-day sequence. Obviously, when they cycle back through, they'll come out down here as well. So once they get that tags, they're ready to roll. Okay, the next thing in the workflow here is the pass-through webinar in process tags. I talked about this a little bit earlier, but we use the webinar and process tags anytime somebody's either in an invitation sequence or they may be actually in the post-registration sequence or post-webinar sequence. So if they're anywhere in the process, we are adding and removing these tags. We add them and remove them in the invitation. And then if they sign up for the webinar, then we add the tag again in the post-registration process where we send them the reminders. And then we remove that at the end of that. If they don't do anything in the invitations, we remove the webinar and process tags. I'm constantly looking for where they could slip through the cracks with this tag, because we don't want the tag to last too long. In fact, I noticed 6 months ago that we had people that were stuck in that with that tag, so we weren't sending them additional emails. So now we have a 14-day timer that says if the webinar and process tag gets applied after 14 days, it's removed no matter what. And it's a fairly complex process that's constantly checking to see if it has that tag. And then if it does after 14 days, then we reapply it or we remove that tag. But in this campaign, what we're checking to see is to make sure that they're not in a webinar and process plan. They shouldn't be because of the way I've built this, but there's a lot of shouldn'ts that wind up happening. So when they come out of the 30-day timer, they're going to push through here, and as long as they don't have the webinar and process tag, they're going to keep moving forward. Now, if they do have that tag, which is the only logic in this decision diamond here, is that process tag. But let's look inside this real quick so we can look and see what it is. They're going to get a note about this. We're going to remove one tag. So the tag that we're actually removing in this one is the 30-day webinar timer tag. They've successfully made it through this far, so we want to make sure that when they cycle back through that we haven't inadvertently added that tag and they wind up just in a series of loops of going through the 30-day timer. Then after 3 days, we're actually going to apply the tag again. So we're going to apply this start decision machine tag. That's hard to say. And that tag is going to start this whole process over again. They're going to go through here, check to see if they're a member. They don't have the 30-day timer tag now, so they should just push right back through here again. Okay, remember, we've pushed them through this tag. Now, if they signed up for another webinar, they are going to have that tag, and they'll go back in to this 30-day timer logic. But as long as they haven't done anything else when this webinar and process tag falls off, in 3 days, it'll check again, send them back through. And now if they don't have the webinar and process tag, they're going to continue to move through this process. Now, there's a couple things that stop this process. One of them is if they buy during that 3 days. So if they're at the end of a webinar process and they wound up purchasing, then that purchase is going to stop this process and stop the loop from happening again. If somehow we miss it, keep in mind that they're going to drop into this members sequence back here. The other thing that's here is this tag goal. So when we apply the start decision machine tag inside any sequence, there needs to be a goal for that afterwards to clear it. Again, I can't reinforce this idea enough. If this sequence doesn't have this tag, this thing only works the first time. And then any other time somebody comes through there, they're just going to get stuck. They're not going to go back through the process. It's not going to go back and check and see if they have these tags. They would just be stuck inside of this campaign. So you've got to have a way to clear people outside of the campaign. And that's the kind of logic you have to think through. At the bottom here is basically a pass-through. We apply a tag at the end here that satisfies both of these goals right here. And the reason I did that is because this is going to be a really long campaign. And when you have long campaigns like that, it really makes a lot of sense to break things up so that a tag getting applied in one place doesn't stop an entire process somewhere. Okay, so for instance, if I just connected this sequence to this sequence and this 6-month timer tag gets applied over here, it stops everything to the left, which means it would stop my 30-day timer. It would stop everything. So I had to create this gap here. In the language I put, this gap is essential for separating the campaigns from the 30-day timer logic. By using 2 identical tag goals, we can ensure that the other tag goals later in the sequence don't kill the 30-day timer loop, which is what I just said. And I won't go into the for instance there. But the whole thing is to keep these things contained within themselves, because they may get this timer, but that doesn't mean I want them to stop the 30-day loop. In fact, right when they start the invitations for a webinar, they're getting these tags that are starting the decision machine, and that decision machine then starts the 30-day process. Meanwhile, the rest of this logic out to the right is still running here. Okay. And this is everything to the right of here is just repeat of the same thing. So I'm going to spend a minute and just dive into one of these and show you what it looks like. Okay. Our first webinar in this process is called 6 Things Pastors Do to Kill Generosity. This webinar is converted really well, and so I wanted to make sure it was early in the process, even though we run Facebook ads to it quite a bit. So the 2 big ideas here were that I wanted to be able to serve this webinar every 6 or 8 months, and I want to be able to send invitations out to my email list as well as run Facebook ads to this. Now, it's really important that you think through all the different ways that people can actually come into one of these webinars, because we don't want to be sending them invitations to a webinar that they just watched. So I'm going to go across the top of these, and then I'll dive down into each one of them. So the first thing here, this is just another pass-through. You'll notice I have a pass-through on the front and on the back of this one. The other thing to note here, too, is I copy from here to here. Infusionsoft told me as I was building this thing that if you're going to copy, if you're going to do mass copy like this of logic and tags, to always copy the original to the subsequent ones, not copy this one to the second webinar and then copy the second webinar to the third one. I think that's pretty smart. They said it does something to their coding on the back end or whatever. I haven't seen it to be an issue in other campaigns, but if they say to do that, then maybe it's a good idea to heed that instruction. So what I'm trying to do here is when they come through my 30 days, if they haven't been served this webinar, then what I want them to do is go right across the top here. So if they haven't seen this webinar in the last 6, 8 months, whatever the timers are set for, I'm going to start applying tags and processes to this. Now, you'll notice when I first built this, I built everything in one sequence. What I'm starting to learn is the greater the complexity, the more you need to break up the steps to make sure that you can actually satisfy goals the correct way. In fact, there's a timer inside of this sequence right here with a lot of other tags for subsequent versions of the decision machine that I'm building for other products. We actually remove that timer and put it in its own sequence so that if we want to change the length of time between when somebody has served a webinar or an email sequence, all we've got to do is change that one sequence instead of diving down into every one of them. That's just a side note. Okay, so if they come through here and they don't have the 6-month timer tag for this webinar, what's going to happen is they're going to go this way in the logic. So let's dive down into this first sequence and see what we got. So the first 2 tags that we're going to add are the 6-month timer. So they didn't have it, so now we're adding it. That means this person cannot get this webinar invitation sequence again for 6 months. They could still come to the webinar from an ad. There's nothing that we can do about that. In fact, we want to encourage that. But we're not going to actually send them our 4 to 6 email sequence with invitations for at least 6 months on this. So, and then the second tag is the invitation trigger. That's the actual tag that triggers the invitation sequence over in the other campaign. So if I go back to the other campaign, you'll see that that tag is actually right here in this goal. When that tag gets applied, it's going to start this invitation sequence, which starts everything. Okay, so that's how those tags work. Now, you'll notice I try to put notes in here for everything because, again, the complexity, I want to be able to remind myself, and I try to do it as much as possible in the campaign, the part of the campaign that I'm building that I'm actually going to duplicate. You can see here there are notes here that are also duplicated over here. Okay, so the next step in this part of the process is this 6-month timer applied. Now, if you think about the tags that we just applied in this sequence, one of those is this tag, and you have to go back and double check and make sure you got the right webinar. But that tag gets applied, it satisfies that goal. Now, the other place that we're applying that tag is inside of our webinar campaign. It's right here. Okay, it's right here. So here's this tag. So that tag would also satisfy this goal. Now, if you think about the logic of how this works, that means that somebody that's never even been in this campaign before, they sign up for a webinar. When they sign up for that webinar, a couple of things that are going to happen. This tag is actually going to get applied, and it's going to put them into this sequence that we're going to dive in. The other thing that's going to happen is that registrants tag that we apply every time somebody registers for a webinar. It's right here. Sorry for the smaller screen. The registrant tag is actually going to be one of the tags, one of the 2 tags that starts the decision machine working again. Okay, see, it's right here. And so what's happening, if you think through the logic of this, is as soon as that tag gets applied over here, this tag, not only are they moving forward through this process, they are actually starting the 30-day timer back over again, which is exactly what we want to see happen. Okay, so let's dive in here. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to remove that invitation sequence tag, which if they got invitations, that sequence tag is applied right before we send the first invitation email. So we take it off right there. If you remember, we actually removed that tag the second day that the emails go to. So again, duplicating, removing tags. Then we're going to wait 20 days, and we're going to remove the invitation trigger tag. Okay, right here. The only reason I put the 20-day timer in there was to make sure that if some way, shape, or form that tag got reapplied within 20 days, that there's no way that those people are getting those invitations again within 20 days. 20 days is still too fast, but at a bare minimum, they're not going to get them. They shouldn't get them, but every 6 months. And then we're going to wait 7 months, you see right here, and then we're going to remove our tag right here, our 6-month timer tag, and then we're applying a tag at the end here that's actually going to get them out of this sequence. That's 7670.1. exit tag. And let me just pause here to say too, the 7670 is actually the campaign name. If you can see that right there, I try to use as many, when I'm building a campaign like this, I try to use the campaign number for the tag so I don't get confused at a later date where these tags are from or what they apply to, because if you just use names for them, sooner or later you'll forget where they go. And then in the last sequence here, all I'm doing is removing this tag, that exit tag. One other thing that I'd like to point out while we're moving through here, One useful tool is if you click on the bottom left of these sequences, you'll see it says stops immediately or runs until completed. I am using runs until completed in some of these because we've got to make sure that the tags come off. With this one, I'm not, because you'll notice that there's no goal down here at the end that indicates a purchase. Okay, so these campaigns, after this 6-month timer gets applied, these campaigns are going to continue to run until all of these tags are executed and removed, which is a really good thing because your customers are going to be just like mine or our customers. Sometimes people will buy and they'll do our trial and then they won't buy. They will get out and then come back in later. And I wanted to be thinking through that the whole time. I know that some people will actually do our trial 1, 2, 3 times before they actually become a paying customer down the road. And I wanted to be able to solve for that in this sequence. So even if they do that, they're still going to go into the decision machine and move through the process. And I'll talk about what happens if they canceled and how to get them back into the process at the end of this video. Okay, so that's what happens. Now, if they come through our logic, let's look at the logic real quick. And let me point out a couple of things that I've learned that are valuable in this, because some of this decision timing logic seems to have changed over the years. So one of the guys at Infusionsoft, there were a couple of issues that I was having. Number one, I was prone to using this and out here a lot. Let's see if I can make it work. You see how it's jumping around? You see that I can't move the cursor, but you see where my cursor is. It says or and. Well, I would click and there a lot and say, if it doesn't contain this and it doesn't contain that. Let me pause right there and say, doesn't contain is the trickiest part, the trickiest quality of this thing. When you're doing doesn't contain, it has to say doesn't contain blank and it doesn't contain blank, but that doesn't mean it doesn't mean that doesn't contain either, right? So if you put 2 tags there, it's basically like an or, but it's an and. When you're using doesn't contain, I don't think there's a reason to ever use or. And what the Infusionsoft the high-tech Infusionsoft customer support, the guy that they gave me to after they gave me to 2 other lower technical support guys, said always use the and button here for the logic. The big thing is to make sure you test the actions here when you're done to make sure the logic is working. Now, let me give you one other caveat to this testing thing. If you have decision diamonds inside of your campaign that are not completely done, meaning you've set them up, but you haven't gone back and actually finished them. So I hope this makes sense. Let me go back out to the main campaign just to make sure that you get what I'm saying. If I create a decision diamond, if I copy this and I leave that like it is, let me show you what happens to the decision diamond. If I test, and I don't need to put a tag in there. Let's just say it has no tags. Oh, great. It's going to work this time. Bottom line is if you leave unsolved logic in here, which I think this is solved, I just haven't published it because there's tags in here. It's already developed. It'll give you, sometimes it'll throw you an error message. So I dealt with that for days with Infusionsoft trying to figure out what was going on and why the logic wasn't working. In fact, if you look at this campaign closely, you'll see that I built internal forms to be able to test the logic on these, all these decision diamonds, because I was actually have to manually test them. If you're getting that error 500 message, that's the issue. Go ahead and either delete the decision nodes that you haven't fully set up or finish setting them up and publish them, or at least get them where they're light green before you try to move on. Okay, so back to my decision diamond here, keeping in mind that they may not be in the perfect order. I think this one actually is. So this is the top sequence that we just went through the tags. That's if they don't contain my members tag, which is the 2040 Double Members Universal Tag. That gets applied for anybody that has my core product, no matter what level they purchase at. And then here's my 6 months tag. Now, if they come back through this process 2 months from now, they're still going to have this generosity 6 month timer tag, in which case, let's go down to the next set of logic and say, okay, if they don't have the tag, if they're still not members, but they do have this tag, then they're going to go through this, been through the campaign already, pass through, which that's great language. So glad I named that aptly. And then the bottom thing here is my 2040 Double Members Tag, which is the name of our core product. So looking at this, if they already have the 6 month timer tag, they're going to go through here. Now, one thing to point out too is these 6 webinars are kind of in the order of the way that I want people to see them, and the order of importance and I think relevance. So that means that if my timer in this sequence right here that's set for 7 months, let's say I've got 10 webinars, but my timers are still set for 7 months. Well, they're not going to see the webinars after 6 or 7 months, because at 7-month mark, I'm removing this tag. And when they come back through, they're going to go back through this campaign again. So these timers in each one of these has to be correlated to the number of webinars that I have in the sequence. Okay, so every time I add a webinar, I need to come back in and change the sequencing and just make sure, okay, is this the way to go with this? In my mind, it makes more sense to have these timers be longer rather than shorter, even if there's a month or two gap at the end of it, because if you think about it, right now, after 6 months, we will have served these people 6 webinar invitations. So that's a good bit. So if there's a little bit of a gap or layoff, that's okay. Okay, and then if they have the 6-month timer for this one, but they're not members, then they're going to move through here. They're going to catch another decision diamond here. This decision diamond I put in just to make sure that nothing was screwed up. So this one basically is the same webinar and process tag. So you've got my webinar and process tag, and I want to make sure that they don't have the 30-day webinar timer, because if they're in the 30-day timer logic that's in the first phase of the decision machine, there's no way they should be this far into the process. So for the only way they pass through is if they don't have either one of these. This is the pass through. I'm sorry, these are upside down too. So if they don't have the webinar and process tag, and if they don't have the 30-day timer tag, then they can keep moving. If they have them, we got a problem. That means that people are sliding through my 30-day timer in my webinar pass through and somehow getting here. And if you keep in mind too, that logic is happening back over here. So we're looking at this node right here. That logic is happening here where the 30-day timer is. It's happening here where the 30-day timer is, and then right in here where my webinar and process tag. Well, that looks like it's pretty far back in the product process, but this is actually all instant. As soon as they push through here, everything's going to happen literally in an instant, and they'll move through to this part. So nobody should be getting here with those tags, but I wanted to create a fail-safe. And here's what I do in case of fail-safe is I create a tag that or a note that goes into their account, so that when somebody pops up and I get a text message that says, hey, there's a problem, I want to make sure that I can go right to that person and look at everywhere they've been in the process. And that's why I'm putting notes in. The next thing I'm going to have this do is text me, and I'll cover up my phone number here. But if there's a text number like mine's, I'm on Verizon, so I can use this vtext.com along with my cell phone number with no dots or hashes in it, and it'll actually send me a text here. It goes from my email address to that text. I use these for everything. You'll notice the subject line here, I've got 7670.1, which is first webinar, and then it basically says automation malfunction. People are passing through. We've got a problem, and based on the timer, you've got 3 days to fix it. Okay, because here's my timer right here with my 3 days to fix it. And then I'm going to apply the decision machine tag again here to start that process over again. Now, reinforcing a couple of ideas. One, when that tag gets applied in here, that decision machine tag gets applied in here, I want to make sure that, again, I'm satisfying a goal out here. And what that does is it pulls everybody out of this sequence by satisfying that goal. And that way, if this same problem happens again with the same person, I'm still made aware of it. Otherwise, they're just going to get stuck right there. Okay, and that's everything you need to know in this. And basically what we've done after that is we've just continued that same logic over and over again through this process. Now, you may be thinking, okay, I'm a little bit confused, Richard. How do they get to the next webinar? Because they followed this path. Now, if you're asking that question, that is a very shrewd question, and you know Infusionsoft really well, because I've put them through a process here. You'll see there's no goal at the end here. What I decided to do was to let these run until they're finished. Now, keep in mind, when I start these two tags here, one of those tags is the 6-month tag. It says it right here. And one of them is the invitation trigger tag. So when I go over to my invitation trigger, just walking through this again, it triggers this tag, which starts this process. I remove the invitation trigger tag here. Then it moves them in here, takes all the invitation or all the tags off for this particular webinar, and then it starts my invitation sequence. On the day that I send the first invitation email, it triggers there's an invitation sequence tag. Now this is invitation trigger, invitation sequence. Yes, I should have named those quite a bit different, but I didn't. So the invitation sequence tag gets tagged just when the first email is going out, and it starts the it satisfies a goal over here inside of the decision machine for that webinar and starts this process over again. Okay, so it tags it here, it removes some tags here, goes through the process, then it hits the 30-day timer again. When it's done with the 30-day timer, thinking logically through this, it moves through here, assuming it doesn't have the webinar and process tag. It keeps moving. This tag gets applied. It jumps that gap, and it comes all the way back here to where we started this process. Now, interestingly enough, as that happens really fast, right? As soon as that invitation sequence tag gets applied from the invitations over here, all of that stuff happens really fast with the exception of the 30-day timer. If they need to go through the 30-day timer again, they will, which in this case they would have. Then they come over here and they already have the 6-month timer tag for this particular webinar. So when they get to this decision node, instead of going this way, they actually go down here. Okay, and if they're not members already, then they move through, assuming they pass this webinar and process logic here. They move on through the pass-through, and then they start the logic for the next webinar, which is the 7 lies that kill church growth. And that's how it works. So there's no way that they can get 2 of these served any faster than 30 days because of the timer. In fact, it'll be a little bit longer than that because I usually start the webinars on a Tuesday or Wednesday afternoon, depending on when the recurring webinar is going to run. We usually run them on Tuesday and Wednesdays, but everyone's a little bit different. So that's kind of how the logic works. Now, let me show you a couple other things while I'm at it. I want to show you what happens if they cancel. So they sign up for our process and then they cancel. And then I'm going to dive a little bit into our 4-day cash machines. So let's deal with cancellations first. So just as a point of clarification, you really do need to have tags for people that cancel in Infusionsoft, whether you're using Infusionsoft's e-commerce platform or not. It makes a lot of sense to know who are your members and who's canceled. With our canceled, we have several different canceled tags that we apply when somebody cancels the process. So I want to make sure that all of those are included here. Let me scroll in a little bit on this. So I want to make sure any of my canceled tags are applied. And when that process starts, then all we're going to do is remove a tag, which is this permanent tag from Decision Machine. We're going to remove it, wait at least 30 days, okay? And then we're going to apply the Start Decision Machine tag again. So we're going to start the process over. Can't remember what this tag is. Okay, this is the canceled sequence. So this logic is wrong. Just so you know, too, this is a good point, a teachable moment for all of us. If you're going to apply notes, make sure you do it before the tag that's going to get applied that ends the sequence. Okay, so the way that was set up, this tag would get applied and that note would not get applied after the fact because this tag at the end is actually satisfying this exit goal right here. And then we're taking this tag off so that we could do this process again. So big picture is anybody that cancels from our core product, we're going to, after 30 days, we're going to stick them back into the decision machine down here, and all the other rules apply, okay, because we haven't removed their tags for which webinars they've seen. So if they've been served the first 3 webinars in this process, then they're going to skip right through those and go to the 4th one. Okay, now let me show you what happens when somebody purchases, because obviously when somebody buys, we don't want to keep serving them webinars and around that content. Now, I will tell you this, we love our webinars, and in fact, one of the goals that we have with our webinars is to make sure that our webinars are high quality, because 95% of the people that register for one of our webinars are not going to purchase right away. So we're selling about 5 to 7%. That means 95% of the people are not buying. We want them to feel really good about us. And because of that, we do about 50 minutes of teaching and about 10 minutes of pitching in our webinars. And so the people that come to our webinars that don't buy, they still feel really good about us. So we actually serve our customers webinars inside of our platform. So anytime we create a webinar, we make it part of the offering for that particular product as well, so they can watch it. This is the last campaign in the process right now. It's called the Lost Generation. It's actually the webinar that we're running ads to right now. So there are people actually in this one right now in this part of the process, which I'll show you when we're done the reporting part of it. But there's 3 ways that this process can end, basically. So when they get to the very end, if they don't do anything, if they don't buy, they go through this 1-month pause. So they'll go in here and it'll wait 30 days and then it applies the Start Decision Machine tag. And if you rewind this video a couple of seconds, you'll realize I did not have this goal set in here, missing my own rules. So this goal, when that tag gets applied, it starts the process over. It also gets people out of this into the process. Otherwise, they would go through the 6 months, and if they don't buy, it would just stop. Here's our 24 to double members tag. Our universal tag gets applied at the very end, and it stops everything to the left. Now, keeping in mind, if you know Infusionsoft logic, it's not going to stop this stuff, okay? Because we wanted to keep a record of if somebody saw this webinar and they bought our product and then a month later they canceled our product, well, I want to re-add them to the decision machine, but I don't want them to get this webinar again for at least 6 months, okay? So this tag will stop everything in the process, but it won't stop things that, are not going to touch the client. If people buy and they're still in the decision machine, remember every time we're going to ask the logic of, are they a member? We ask this in every part of the webinar sequence, which includes all of this stuff. And then we also ask it at the beginning in the 30-day timer right before we put them into that. So that's how that process stops, is with a single tag at the end. You'll notice I've got add to decision machine part 2 down here. That's actually going to be decision machine part 3, which is going to be a different video. One of the questions that I wanted to answer in this was, how do we serve them live stream content that I shot yesterday when they're in a 6-month process like this? And I solved that problem by using that webinar and process tag to see who's in a process and who's not. Maybe I'll add that to the end of this video. Who knows? Okay, let's jump back down to the beginning of the process now. And I'm going to show you how I add in a 4-day cash machine, or a 4DCM is what I'll use the language in here a lot. So I thought through a bunch of different ways to do this. We've got these tags in the 30-day timers here. We're actually applying tags throughout this process. So the 5-day tag, 10 days, 15, 20, and 25. I think that will be useful for a lot of things. But what I wanted to make sure is that if somebody watches a webinar on Thursday, they'll get 3 days of follow-up emails. So they'll get Thursday, Friday, and Monday. The following Monday, I want to start this 4 email sequence that gives them the best offer on our thing. They get access to all of our content for 30 days for just $7. And I wanted that process to happen pretty consistently within about a week or 10 days after they view a webinar. So what I decided to do, instead of using those 5, 10, 15-day tags, I decided to use a tag that gets applied inside of the post-webinar campaign inside of Stealth. So this is the post-webinar campaign. I showed this earlier in the video. So when they register for a webinar, they go through this process. We remove all of the tags for this webinar, and then we start adding them back. They get a confirmation email. They get the 6-month timer for this webinar here, so they can't see this. They won't get invitations for this webinar again for 6 months. And then we make sure that they can go through this reminder sequence. Right here in the center of this page, you'll see that I've had to duplicate this over the last 3 or 4 months. Actually just moved this to make this work a little bit more efficiently. If I click on this, you're going to see this replay available tag. This replay available type tag is consistent through all of our webinars. This tag gets applied right at the moment when they view the webinar. And so what we're going to use is that tag. So when Stealth reaches out to Infusionsoft to apply this tag, saying that their webinar is today at 2 o'clock, that tag is also going to trigger this process down here at the bottom. Now, you can see right here, I had the 15-day tag was going to be applied to start this process. I stopped that for right now. One thing you'll notice about this, too, as a side note, the only people that are going to get my 4-day cash machine are people that actually registered for the webinar. That keeps us from hammering down on our list of people that are not necessarily interested in our product right now. We deal with those people in part 3 of the decision machine. In parts 1 and 2, we're just focused on people that sign up for one of our webinars. They don't have to attend. They can sign up, get our free thing, and not attend, and they're going to get this 4-day sequence a week or week and a half later. So that tag that I just showed you in that campaign, every tag for every webinar we have is right here. They're all those replay available tags. So any of those webinars will kickstart this process, even if they're not already in the decision machine. If they come off of a Facebook ad and that tag gets applied, it's going to put them into this part of the process. They're going to move through here. You can see I've got a restart tag here for this process as well, because we're going to use a lot of the same logic. They're going to move through this pass-through that leads to this decision diamond asks whether or not they're a member of our core product. Again, we're still dealing with the core product here. And then they're going to go through our webinar and process loop right here. This is where, again, where I'm checking to make sure that they're not in another webinar process or 4-day cash machine or anything else that we have that we're using that webinar and process. If we're sending them, if we've got them in a campaign right now, we should not be sending them another campaign. Again, I've used the same exit loop theology right here with this gap to make sure that goals that get satisfied out here to the right don't stop the logic over here to the left from happening. This tag also is also checking for the webinar process tag every 3 days for those contacts. And then I basically use the same logic here that we use for the webinar, except instead of sending them to a webinar, we're sending them to this 4-day cash machine logic. Now, let me jump over to that campaign just to confuse you a bit more. This is the 4-day cash machine campaign right here. We've got a couple of these, but this is the one that we're using with the decision machine. So we send them in here. Here's our decision machine logic up here to the left. So same kind of thing. We do an invitation trigger. We remove that tag immediately. We pass them through here, and then we check the logic again to see if they're members already, because sometimes in between somebody could sign up, and then we move them on through. And here I've created some logic that says, let's send them through version 1 of this. We apply a tag in here, version 1 tag. Let me show you this just so you know, for those that are of you that are deep diving into this. The tag for version 1 is 3527. Again, the campaign number, 4-day cash machine version 1, 4DCM version 1. This tag, if they don't have this tag, they go into version 1. Inside of version 1, we apply this tag so that when they come back through the next time, they can only go through version 2. So if it's all whether or not they have version 1 or not. If we wanted to add a version 3, we could. Version 2, honestly, I haven't changed the language in it yet. Version 2 will probably just be different subject lines and opening paragraphs, because if I go back over here to part 2, hope that wasn't confusing. Now we're back in the decision funnel, decision machine. So that was the actual 4-day cash machine. Now we're back into my original campaign, the 4-day or the decision machine. In here, I've got logic that I built in. Again, applied 2 tags here. Sorry about that. Let me back up. It's the same thing we looked at for the webinars. It works exactly the same way, with the exception of the timer I only have set to 10 weeks. Okay, that means that they can't get a 4-day cash machine any more regular than every 10 weeks, and we're going to switch it out between these 2 different versions of the cash machine. So that means that only about every half a year would they see one of these webinars, and only if they registered for one of our events. So I feel really comfortable just having 2 versions of that there. Okay, so let's go back out to Decision Machine again, back in the big campaign where we're managing all this logic, and it goes all the way through. This handles 2 decision machines. What I will add here eventually is I'll copy all of this from here to here. I'll copy this and pull it out here, and instead of adding another 4-day cash machine for this product, I'll add 4-day cash machines for our other products out here to the right. Now, the frequency of that will be much less. So let's say I've got a product called Church Video Black Box. I've got one called Live Stream Your Sunday Service. Those products I'll add out here to the right, but they will only be seeing those 4-day cash machines maybe every 3 or 4 months. After they buy our core product, we'll actually amp up the volume of messages about our other products, and I'll show you how I'm doing that in part 3. Okay, before we move on to part 3 and I show you anything else, I wanted to show you just kind of what reporting looks like. And I get this is super tiny, so I'll scroll in just a second. But you'll see if I scroll in just a little bit that we've already got people in here. I didn't cover this part at the top. This was something I had to put in play to be able to make sure that people that are leads that we're generating today, these are leads that we've generated over the last 2 weeks into this webinar down here at the bottom. But I wanted to make sure that I could separate the 2 groups of people so that I wasn't re-adding people to the process that were already in the process. So you don't really need to know that. Just know the reason I didn't cover that off is because it's not important for what we're learning. Okay, so All right, so you see the people are starting to move through. They're getting caught up here the way I want them to. This is my 30-day timer. You can see down here at the bottom, this is my 4-day cash machine logic. That is starting to circle. Only one person has made it through so far because we started this process by putting everybody into a campaign, which gives them that webinar and process tag that we applied. And then if I scroll way out here to the right, the webinar that we're running Facebook ads to right now is this one. This last campaign out here in the last 24 hours, we've had 33 people that have registered for that webinar. And you can see there's 124 people that are in this part of the process right now, moving through. If I do current, you probably see where they are in timers. Okay, so there's 124 people in that 20-day timer right there. So you can see that so far, it looks like everything is working with this campaign, but it is really early, which is why I only added about a third of our contact list to the campaign so far, and I only added them the people that are not really opening our emails because I want to see those people move through the process before we put in our really high quality people that are engaging with our content. Okay, in the next video, or the next part of the video, I'm going to dive into part 3 just a little bit, even though it's not completely built out. I will update it later, but for now, I think it'll give a good representation of what we're trying to do in between webinar invitations and 4-day cash machine funnels, what we're doing with our contacts to make sure that we can kind of stay out there adding value to them. Okay, this is part 3. Part 3 is the problem I'm trying to solve with part 3 is this. If I put people into a 6-month, 8-month, or a year webinar process for product A, how do I offer them products B, C, D, and E, or new product X when it comes along? Keeping in mind that I want to make I am trying to automate completely product A. That was the whole point of this, but I still want to be able to serve those people, especially when I'm putting a month gap in between webinars being served to them, with the exception of when we do put that 4-day cash machine out to them, in which case there's probably going to be still a 15 or 18-day gap. So I want to be able to add one-off, two-off email situations to those people when I did that. So that's the reason for part 3. So let me make this a little bit bigger. So this is going to be triggered when somebody gets added to my church list, which is every single person that we generate as a lead, they get added to the church list. I actually run a business, a different business out of this Infusionsoft instance, and I use a different tag for that. So anybody that ever becomes a lead on the church-based side, this tag's going to get applied, and then we're going to start them in this process. Now, you might be thinking, well, why not add them to part 1 or 2 and trigger off of that? Because not everybody signs up for a webinar. There's too many different varying points of logic that needs to happen where I can just go, okay, how do I solve this problem just based off of using the fact that they came onto my list and this webinar and process tag. Okay, so you'll see the first thing that I check here is the webinar and process logic. This first sequence is actually going to remove a tag that's unique to this campaign. It's the 7880 restart WIP tag check. WIP is webinar and process tag check. I want to make sure that that tag is not present before I send them through. That tag actually is the tag that satisfies this goal. So we apply that tag throughout this process to bring them back to the beginning of the process and have the tags rechecked for webinar and process, because I don't want to send anybody even a single email when they're in a webinar process invitations to another webinar, because in my opinion, that feels like a bit much. Plus, the messaging can be confusing. If I'm selling one thing in an email they got at 10 a.m. and I'm offering something else in an email they got at 2 a.m. So this process is actually going to check every day. Now, Infusionsoft may kill me for this because I'm going to be checking a lot of different leads every day. They're going to go through this process once a day at 3 a.m. in the morning when no other processes are really running, that in the morning. And actually, you know what? I'm going to change that to use contacts time zone. That way, not everybody's running at the same time. And then I'm going to satisfy this goal by applying this tag, this restart the process. That tag satisfies the goal right here. And that goal and this goal get satisfied at the same time, and it starts the process again to see if they have this webinar and process tag. When they come through this finally, when they're done with their 4-day cash machine or their webinar invitations or post-purchase or post-registration process, when they finally show up in this logic and they don't have the webinar and process, they're going to push on through here. And again, you'll see we've used a gap there to keep this part of the process separate from everything going forward. And then you'll see step 2 is a simpler version of what we were dealing with in parts 1 and 2, where we're adding the tag, passing through, and then seeing if they've gotten this email. So if this is email A about our core product, if they haven't got it, then they'll go in here. If they haven't received this email, they'll go in here. If they have received it, they'll go through here. This time I used tags that were just based on the campaign number 7880. And then the first email is going to be 0.01. And then the second one will be 0.02 and so forth. And that's kind of the tags. As long as they don't have the member tag, this universal member tag we've talked about. So if it contains that or it contains the 7801, it's going to push them through this part of the process. Oops, I'm sorry. It'll actually push them through this part of the process. Now, just to clarify, if they already got the email in 7880.01, they're not going to get it again. We've got the timer set up on these now for 6 months. Okay, so they couldn't get this email again for 6 months. Actually, a little bit more than 6 months the way these are set up. But just to be clear, if they already saw this email in the last 6 months, they're not going to get it again. If they're a member, they're going to move through this part of the process. Now, you may be asking, if you're paying close attention, why not have another sequence set up down here for people that have already bought this products? Because we're going to add people out here to the right, and ongoing, we're going to add campaigns that are for different products. So I don't want to just stop everybody and have to create new logic on that. We're going to stagger the offer that we put into these. A year from now, we'll have 55 or 60 of these emails, maybe even more than that, that'll go out weekly based on when people don't have that webinar and process tag. And I don't want to stop anybody. I just want them to decide which product do they have. And if they have product A, then they're going to move through everything that is about product A, and they'll move to product B, C, or D, or X, or whatever it is. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, that's it. I'm going to put a link at the bottom of the description on this to another video that I did for my team that's a deeper dive into how we duplicate these processes, specifically in part 1, how we duplicate and set up new webinars in there. So if you do dive into this and you use Infusionsoft, I think that'll be really helpful for you. So look for that link at the bottom of the index in the description below. Thanks.